Well, thank you, Jeff, and thanks for taking the time for everybody to be here. I've been doing a lot of reading during this shelter in place period. And just last week, I read one of my favorite books, which I'm holding up here. It's called The Boys of Summer by Roger Kahn. And it's about the Brooklyn Dodgers from the 1950s and their battles against the hated Yankees. I read that book as a child and I fell in love. I'd already fallen in love with baseball, but I fell in love with the World Series and with New York City and everything about that place and those voices and that time before I'd ever even visited there. I was born in India, but I grew up in Duluth, Minnesota. I moved there at the age of 5, and I was dying to fit in. I was dying to be as much of an all-American kid as I could. And in my neighborhood, that meant sports. I quickly became sports obsessed, particularly obsessed with baseball. I was a terrible player as a kid, but with a lot of hard work, I managed to achieve a certain level of mediocrity. But as a fan, I was outstanding. I was top of the heap. In my neighborhood from a very young age, I was known as the kid who knew about baseball. I would carry around this yellow transistor radio all summer long, and we'd listen to the broadcast of our beloved Minnesota Twins. And when October came, I would spend as much time as I could staring at the TV and watching the playoffs and the World Series for these epic battles from these faraway cities that I'd never visited, but I someday hoped to see. Now, in real life, we barely ever saw any Major League Baseball games at all. Growing up in Duluth, the one time, one day each year that we got to go to see a baseball game was when the Parks and Recreation Department rented out these big yellow buses, a big fleet of them. And we would pile into the bus and we would drive 3.5 hours to Bloomington, Minnesota, just south of Minneapolis, where the Mall of America is today. And we would watch the Twins play at the old Metropolitan Stadium in the afternoon. And we'd get back in the bus and drive 3.5 hours home at night to our parents. My friends and I lived for this day. It was the only time we could ever see a real Major League Baseball game live. The first time I ever lived in a city with a Major League Baseball team was when I moved here to the Bay Area to go to school. And I quickly became a diehard Giants fan, which was not very cool back then. The A's were the cool team, but I could never cheer for them because they were divisional rivals with my beloved Minnesota Twins. So I became a Giants fan. And pretty soon I started to sit out in the bleachers at Candlestick Park for $2.50. I remember a drunk guy being hauled out by 4 police officers one night smiling at us. And he says, "I got $2.50. I'll be right back in a minute." But not very many of us went to Candlestick Park. And for a time, it looked like the Giants were going to leave for Florida. And so I was overjoyed when they announced that they were going to build a brand new ballpark in downtown San Francisco. And there was a new ownership group and they were going to keep the team right here. Flash forward 7 years to the year 2000. I'm working in tech. I'm living in San Francisco. The Giants have the best home record in Major League Baseball. The .com boom is at its absolute peak. And in August, my friend Larry calls me up and he says, "Listen, if this happens and this happens and this happens and this happens, on October 4th, the Giants will host the Mets in the afternoon in a playoff game, and the A's will host the Yankees that night at the Coliseum. And you and I are going to both games. Understand?" Now, Larry was from New York, and I didn't argue with him very much. I understood exactly. And indeed, he was prophetic. Let's give a moment to shout out Larry, the visionary who saw in the middle of August that this was going to happen on October 4th. It turns out a lot of my friends are hardcore baseball geeks like Larry. So it all came to pass, and Larry and I went to see 2 playoff games on the same day. I used to only get to see 1 game every summer. This was the greatest day of my life. And I had a dream because I was going on vacation with my girlfriend Jennifer to New York City in 2 weeks. I had a dream the Giants would play the Yankees in the World Series, but it was not to be. The Giants were swept out after that first win. They were swept out by the Mets. And in fact, it was the Mets and the Yankees that qualified for the World Series. It was the first Subway Series in New York City since the 1950s, and I was going to be in New York. Now, I knew better than to hope for tickets. I thought there was no chance, but my girlfriend was very understanding. We flew to New York. We went straight to our hotel. We turned on the TV, and we watched the entire World Series game. Our plan was to go out for dinner and drinks after the game was over. But unfortunately, the Yankees, the dastardly Yankees, tied the game in the bottom of the ninth. We ordered a pizza. The game went 14 innings, and the Yankees won in the end, and our night was over. The next day was this beautiful, sunny, crisp fall day in New York City, and we took the subway to Brooklyn, and we were having brunch with a friend of ours at this rooftop terrace, and I was just overcome, and somehow the words came out of my mouth. We have to go to the game tonight. We have to get tickets somehow. I had no idea how this was going to happen. New York City is the most expensive city in the world, and everybody in New York City wanted to go to the Subway Series. But my girlfriend, Jennifer, simply looked at me and said, okay, let's give it a try. It turned out she had an ace in the hole. She had a friend named Donna, who was an Italian-American lady, very well connected, who'd spent her entire life in the Bronx. And we called Donna, and Donna, who was home with the flu, simply said, I'll talk to my guy. This was about 11 a.m. And soon after that, we got back on the subway, left Brooklyn for Lower Manhattan. And as we were wandering around sightseeing, every so often we would call Donna and she would give us updates. And finally, at 3:30, she said, okay, my guy, he's got a guy. His name is Jeff. He's coming in from Staten Island. He has your tickets. It's $600. It's an all-cash deal, and don't be late. Meet him at McHale's Bar, West 46th and 8th Avenue. Be there. Click. Now, getting $600 out of an ATM or two or three or four in New York City in the year 2000, when all you had was out-of-town bank accounts, was no simple thing. But we scurried about and we hit one ATM after another, and between $100 and $200 at a time, eventually we had the $600 we needed. We got in a cab and got to McHale's Bar at 4:58 p.m. I walk out from that beautiful New York sunshine into the darkness of McHale's Bar, and I'm looking around, I'm giving people the eye, and people are looking at me, and there's one burly 50-something guy at the bar who looks kind of friendly. He's got a receding hairline and a hint of a smile, and I walk up to him and I said, hey, are you Jeff? And he looks at me and he smiled and he says, no, I'm Jim. Are you Raphael? And at the other end of the bar, some guy says, where's that fucking Raphael with my tickets? Turns out everybody in there was waiting for their tickets. And at that moment, my phone rings. There's a voice on the other end of the phone. It says, this is Jeff. I'm in a red Camaro. Meet me outside the bar. I'll be there in 30 seconds. And I walk outside of the bar and bam, a red Camaro pulls up with dark tinted windows, slowly rolling down on the passenger side. And a swarthy looking, muscle shirt wearing Italian dude from Staten Island just looks at me without the hint of kindness and says, do you have the money? Do you have the money? And I said, yeah. I was quite nervous. I said, here it is. I gave it to him and he hands me an envelope. And I said, hey, it's all there. We're all good here. You can count it. He looks at me and he goes, no. He goes, I don't need to count it. Somebody spoke for you. And just like that, I've got 2 tickets in my hand for the Subway Series. I walk back into the bar to find Jennifer, and it turns out she's having a beer with Jim and his brother Mark. Jim and Mark are in their mid-50s. They're lifelong baseball fans and lifelong New Yorkers. They were alive during the last Subway Series, so they were the youngest of 7 kids. And so they had recollections, barely. And they were just as excited to go to this game as we were. In fact, after a beer or two with them, we rode the subway and we chatted with them the whole time. We got out of the subway. They walked to the stadium with us. They gave us a high five and said, be careful out there in the bleachers. Beware the bleacher creatures. The game was so intense, but my memories of the game are all about the sounds and the smells and the food in the air and the beer and the yelling and the screaming and the thick New York accents. Halfway through the game, Jennifer leans over at me and she says, I swear to God, these people are all character actors cast in the role of stereotypical New Yorkers. The Yankees win again, 6-5 in another tight game. And as we walk out of that stadium that night, I feel completely self-actualized. It's like the consummation of a love affair between me and baseball in the city of New York. And it's all as a consequence of my love affair with Jennifer, who I proposed to a few months later and have been married to ever since. And now that we're sheltering in place and there is no baseball, I think about that night and so many magical nights at the ballpark very often. But I also think about that day and the simple things that we did that day that suddenly now are out of reach. Having brunch in a crowded restaurant in Brooklyn with strangers, riding on a subway car packed cheek to jowls, meeting people in a bar and having conversation with them, and making new friends out in public spaces. I miss baseball during these days, and I feel for the people of New York City, and I can't wait to see them both again. Thank you.